For thousands of years, civilization has been a destructive force, both ecologically and socially. In the midst of the sixth extinction, the future of humanity and our other than human kin hangs by a thread. At this pivotal moment in time, we must reach back into the depths of the human story and uncover our mistakes. There is still time to reconnect with what we have lost, to restore our broken relationship to the land where we dwell, and to remember the human place in the wild. Hello, and welcome to the Rewilding Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Michael Bauer. This podcast is produced and made possible from supporters on Patreon. Thank you. If the Rewilding Podcast inspires you, gives you hope, or makes you think, please subscribe, share it on social media, and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. If you're new to rewilding and want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. There are few opportunities for people living in modern context to experience what life would be like living in a band of hunter-gatherers. While there are still several cultures in the world living this way, most are protected from outsiders through organizations like Survival International, and for good reason. While rewilding isn't a synonym for primitive living or a total return to hunting and gathering societies, we can learn a lot about how to live in a regenerative way through contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, as well as experiences that can replicate aspects of those societies. Boulder Outdoor Survival School in Utah is one such place to get a taste of the immediate return hunting and gathering experience. I recently attended their hunter-gatherer course, and here to talk about it with me is one of their core instructors for that program, Randy Champagne. Originally from Michigan, Randy found his way to the deserts of Utah after taking a survival course that sparked his love for the wild. He has been at the Boulder Outdoor Survival School since 2008, where he's been teaching and practicing ancestral and modern survival skills. His passion is in traditional hunting and gathering techniques. He was a participant on the television show Alone, testing his solo skills on seasons 2 and 5 on Vancouver Island and in Mongolia. Randy, thanks for joining me on the Rewilding Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter.
First, I just want to ask, what got you into ancestral skills to begin with?
Wow. Yeah. Well, so, where I grew up, which was not far, maybe just a couple of minutes outside of Detroit in Michigan. There wasn't much for wilderness where I was at. And there was just this little patch of woods behind my house where I spent a good portion of my childhood just exploring, building forts, doing things that kids enjoy doing. And, and then just life started happening, through high school into college, thinking about kind of like what the next step for my life would be. And I just had kind of no clue. My relationship to the natural world was sort of built around what a lot of people in Michigan do as outdoors people is hunting. And I spent a lot of time hunting. My dad and all the men in my family are hunters. And so I started hunting when I was around 13. And I didn't quite know, that there was the ability to sort of be a wilderness guide, instructor. I didn't know that was a path that one person could take. But I did know that from a young age, I knew I felt at home the most in a wilderness type setting. I loved waking up early with the birds. I loved sitting out in a tree stand, freezing cold weather, and just like, hearing owls and just like from a young age, just feeling like this was a place that I felt the most comfortable. Way more so than I felt in like, traditional schooling. Just being a kid with a lot of energy and, sitting in a chair all day long was just really difficult for me. So fast forwarding a little bit, I got into, just all types of wilderness books, trying to learn how to make fire and, build shelters and set traps and things along those lines. And that led me to, The Tracker, by Tom Brown Jr. And so, and that book was, in a lot of ways had opened up my world into like really a direction to actually practice those skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I went out and took a course. I basically dropped out of college, went out and took a course with Tom Brown Jr. at the Tracker School, and it was totally fine. It was a great door opening experience for me, but it wasn't my way of learning, and that to me it felt, pretty classroom based. It was a lot of just tons of people. It was like 150 people in my class, and we were sitting down, and Tom was lecturing, and it was just not my style of learning.
Same.
And so I sought out more ways to sort of expand my knowledge base of wilderness living, and that led me to the Boulder Outdoor Survival School. And so back in 2007, I took a 14-day field course, green as one person could possibly be, real young. I think I had just turned 21, and I think I went out on my field course wearing like jeans, like, and a cotton flannel and like a bandana. And I was like, I don't know why nobody told me to like not wear that. But at any rate, we now know, and I know now, wool is the ticket. But so I just spent 14 days shivering, and but I loved it. I loved the physical aspect of it. I loved doing I loved the hardship of it. I loved the connection of it. It changed my world dramatically. And after that course, knowing how I think my instructors saw how impacted and affected I was, and so they asked me to come back in the following year and be an apprentice. And so then I just dove right in. I just sort of said, like, there's not a whole lot else for me to do at this point in time in my life besides do this. I don't know if it's what I'm going to do forever, but it's what I'm going to do for now. And I ended up sort of just falling in love with it, falling in love with the school, the people at the school, the students, the land, all of it. And so I just started, living that way, and kind of have been ever since.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know how anybody could go there and not at the minimum fall in love with the land. I mean, the landscape there is just breathtaking. There's nothing like that place in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It has a like just a harsh beauty to it. It's so welcoming and inviting, and at the same time, it's so sort of unrelenting, and it doesn't care whether you live or die,
No.
But it's there, and it's available, and it's really beautiful and special place.
Yeah. So what is, I've done a couple of episodes I did an episode with Eli, former director of Boss, and with Hannes, who's also an instructor there. So instead of kind of talking about what Boulder Outdoor Survival School is, I want to ask, like, what is the hunter-gatherer course? And I know I've taken it, but if you were to tell, explain it to somebody who's never taken it before, like, how would you describe it to somebody?
Yeah, that's a tough question, especially kind of coming back from the hunter-gatherer course and trying to explain to people what it is that we've been doing for the last couple of weeks in the desert. But I would say at its core, the hunter-gatherer course is is as close as one person can get at this point in time in sort of a controlled setting to existing in a way that our ancestors would have existed in hunter-gatherer bands. It's it's complicated in that it's not a lifestyle, it's an experience. So it's a little bit different than what you might yeah, it's a little bit different than one person might, sort of expect. But the idea behind the hunter gatherer is traveling through an area with really limited amount of equipment, things sort of pre metal age. So we're going, stone age, stone tools, uh, the clothes that are on our back, mostly natural fibers. And we're going into a place which has both scarcity and abundance. And we're doing our absolute best to make a living off the land. So that might mean gathering lots of acorns and finding what's on during this particular time of the year, during that this particular season in this particular place. And so it's being adaptable as well as it's being opportunistic. And moving through the landscape, we might stop and gather pinion cones and bring them to camp, gather acorns. We might have a chance to hunt something along the way. So we're moving from one point to the other point, and then setting up a shorter base camp. During that shorter base camp, we're sustaining ourselves the best that we absolutely can with the resources that we have available until it feels like it's time to move on. So we'll move from point A to point B, set up a base camp, and then use some primitive traps. We primarily in our course use a Paiute deadfall trap. So that's a big part of I would say, passive income. So passively catching food. It's a way for us to not maybe front load a little bit of caloric expenditure. But we know that our traps are out there, they're working for us, and we don't have to do anything else besides check them in the morning and check them at night. During the daytime, it's a lot of just, going out, gathering what we can gather, going on little fishing expeditions. And for the most part, it's just trying to find a way to live off the land as much as we possibly can. Yeah. So, there's a lot of depth to the hunter-gatherer course, and there's a lot more to it than just living off the land as well. There's also the idea of living with other people, where there's a lot of depth to the hunter-gatherer course. We made bows. We processed an animal at the beginning of the course, and dried food. So we had travel food. So in a lot of ways, we are existing in a way that one person would have existed in, a couple hundred years ago, to early days, thousands and thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a really cool controlled simulation. I mean, controlled, that sounds like, what I mean by that is like not that it's controlled in a particular sort of, hierarchy or something like that, but controlled in that, like, I know you all probably had a sat phone like stashed away somewhere in case there was like an emergency, right? Where like, we wouldn't have had that availability, outside of the school's context. I think that's one of the things I appreciate the most about the school is like the safety net that I know is kind of there, invisible in the background. Should anything go awry, like a lot of people don't really have that. I think it's similar to, like, I'm assuming your experience on the show alone, where like how often are there these like infrastructures of safety nets in place for people to actually go out and fully experience this with that ability should they need it, like if you were to just go out and do something like alone without any of those without any of the insurance or all the things, right? Of
Yeah, yeah.
people there in your corner watching your back, it'd be a lot more dangerous. And so I think that prevents people from doing it. And I think that's one of the values of Boss, is that knowing that there's this sort of like these people working behind the scenes, but also then like trusting the instructors like you and Jesse, in sort of like being the sort of leaders of the hunting party, if you will, like being the ones that are the most experienced, that are going to kind of show us, the ropes, so to speak. When
Mm-hmm.
I talked to Hannes before, a couple of days before I went out, and he was like, it's probably going to be a lot more, collaborative than like the 14-day, which is definitely more like you're moving and you're doing this kind of stuff. Like you'll get to your base camp and kind of like, it's sort of like a choose your own adventure sort of thing,
Yeah.
and it really was. And that
Yeah.
was one of the cool things about it too. And also one of the things that, I think learning how to catch a fish by hand, like I've never done that before. I think that was one of my highlights, and how easy, how just like simple it is, they just
Yeah.
take them out of the water. Like I was like, hey, I caught a fish with my bare hands. People were like, oh, you're a badass. I'm like, no, you don't
Yeah,
understand. It's like so easy.
yeah.
It's you
It's
just pick
almost
them
too
up,
easy. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why we have to cap it. We're
right,
like,
exactly.
let's start
Yeah,
with just two,
yeah,
everybody,
right.
and then we'll go from there. And
Yeah.
I think um yeah, having that safety net, having people who have done it before, and I think that's one of the magical experience parts of the Boss experience, is that you are going in blind with sort of zero expectations
Mm-hmm.
of anything,
Mm-hmm.
but we do mostly know what's going on.
Yeah. Right.
uh,
I think
and
shout out to Matt and Salty. They had come off of there were two students who had come off of a 28-day course just right before that, and then went into the hunter gatherer. So they were
uh,
already in like a 28-day caloric deficit. But one of the things they were joking about is that like the quote of all of the Boss instructors, if you ask them a question, is just "We'll see."
yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, it's sort of about like, I think, yeah, what you said in terms of expectations, and just kind of being willing to go with the moment,
yeah.
um and not have everything pre-planned, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. And that's one thing about the hunter gatherer course, which is maybe a little different than the field courses, is that we do actually provide you with a little bit more information, I think, than
mm-hmm,
even the field courses do, even though it's a little,
totally,
very little amount of information.
totally. Yeah.
There was more, because we were moving in a way that we were moving through the land together, and
Mm-hmm,
and and there was less of a separation, I feel like, between the instructors
mm-hmm,
and the students.
mm-hmm.
We were all suffering in some ways together.
Right. Yeah.
And our
Yeah.
and our our joys were joyous
Mm-hmm,
together, and when we caught fish, we shared it together, or
mm-hmm,
traps,
mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm,
all of the things. And so
mm-hmm,
I think that that's one of the things I absolutely really love about the hunter gatherer course, is that we are moving as if we were a band of
mm-hmm.
people, you know as opposed to, we weren't eating, we were all on the same page.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I really, when I found out that we weren't going to take a water bottle with us, that we were just going to carry a gourd, without not a canteen gourd. I was excited to like just see how that would work, and I assumed that we'd be going from, obviously we're not going to die of dehydration, so we would have water available. Um, and I think it was just cool to kind of, you know, test those limits, and to be able
Yeah.
to know the landscape that well. I mean, so I've talked about this with a bunch of people since I've come home. And I've said things like, we didn't have blankets and blah, blah, blah. Like, well, I'm pretty sure, some people said like, well, I'm pretty sure like hunter gatherers like had blankets with them, or would carry some sort of, and, in museums around, I've seen like the turkey feather shawls and rabbit
Yeah.
shawls that Paiute people would carry in that area. But I'm like, there's something more happening beyond that. Like, we're not trying to replicate specifically a particular people in that,
Yeah.
but we're also learning like that we don't need to carry those things if we know the environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big part of it too, is, just knowing the physiology of how our bodies gain and lose heat, through thermoregulation. We can use the landscape to help our bodies retain as much heat as we possibly can. We're essentially creating down blankets out there
Mm-hmm.
with natural
Mm-hmm.
materials, building shelters, really low lying shelters that are helping to break some of the wind, so we're not losing heat, through convection. And so, and sleeping close together, oftentimes we're able to radiate heat into each other. And so yeah, the land provides most of what we need in order to sustain ourselves, as long as we know a little bit of information, and just know where to look. We in that particular environment, we're sort of, it's as good as it possibly can be. I mean, we got a little bit of rain at the beginning of that course, but for the most part, things were pretty dry, and they weren't too cold. I mean, there were some colder nights, but you can survive and thrive, and our bodies adapt as well, which is a really sort of cool thing to see in the students and in ourselves, in myself, is seeing like, yeah, I'm, the first couple of days being out there, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, maybe a little chilly at night, but it's not too long before my body starts to adapt in a way and find its own rhythm, that in fact, when I get back into sort of the society, or back home or whatever, that I find actually myself being more uncomfortable sleeping on super cushy, beds, and temperature regulation. And, I'm like, I need to, like, open the window, or in fact, like, sleep outside oftentimes, just on a thin mat. And, in fact, even last night, I thought, oh, maybe I'll like try to like bring another, like, topper onto my like little mattress or whatever, and then I ended up taking it off because it was too comfortable.
That's funny. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, the other thing is, people are like, there's this sort of thing of like, these courses, people experience a lot of discomfort, right? And I think in a ancestral setting, the people who are living as hunter gatherers are not like in a constant state of discomfort. And what I think the course does is expand your comfort zones. And like you're
yeah,
saying, your body adapts to these changes, right? And I think most people in contemporary society, or modern, so-called, modern society, haven't had the chance to really expand their comfort zones. And so,
mm,
like, you can, this is sort of contradictory, but like, you can be uncomfortable without being uncomfortable. Like, I don't know if that if that really makes any sense, right? But like,
yeah, uh-huh,
like
totally.
like learning how to be hungry without it being an uncomfortable thing, or learning how to be cold without being uncomfortable in that cold.
Yeah. Well, you start to
Um,
sort of disconnect from, in some ways, like, I don't know if you have this
mhm,
experience when you're out there, but I know I start to like, almost am able, in sort of like a, without sounding too whatever, but sort of like name the sensations that
mm,
you are having. It's like, I'm experiencing hunger right now. I'm experiencing cold right now, but they're just sensations. It's not going to kill me.
totally.
Um, and so, to be able to sort of tap into that and know sort of just what you really can sort of get away with in terms of your ability for your body to adapt, you realize we live in a very sort of cushy world, and we're constantly consuming, even, things that we need, like food. It's like we are constantly eating,
Yeah, right.
and
Yeah.
we never allow our bodies to catch up. And so, and sometimes it's like, I like to go about the process of, especially on the tail end of these longer trips that I do, um, to carry some of those lessons that I
Mm,
learned on those trips that we do into my daily life,
hmm
and allow myself to be hungry for a little
hmm
bit, allow myself to be uncomfortable and cold, and all of those things, because I think that they're valuable in our ability to adapt to new situations.
hmm Yeah, I think it was interesting this time around. Was different than my 14-day course. Like, in the 14-day field course I took, um, I feel like it didn't feel challenging to me enough at the end. The most challenging part was the part where the solo, because I just sit by myself, and then time all of a sudden goes by really slowly. And I was
Mhm.
thinking about that a lot more on the hunter gatherer course, because we were pretty much together most of the time. But at the very end, we did basically like a 16-hour solo that went through the night. And I was realizing how, like, even like there's a thing that is a new discomfort, or to kind of label it, that I hadn't before, was like the perception of time, and the
Mm,
like when time slows down, how uncomfortable that can be if you're like in an uncomfortable place. So like,
yeah.
we all went off to find our own places, and everybody else got all the good overhangs, and all the things.
Yeah.
Because I had to take the first shit that I had taken in like a week and a half or whatever,
Totally.
And then by the time I got there, they're all were taken, and I was like, I guess I'm just gonna pick a spot by the creek, even though I know it's gonna be like cold as hell all night right here.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so yeah, I just had a really, it was like the best solo I've ever had was
Yeah.
was on the hunter gatherer course. And in part, I think because I actually brought a journal and I let myself write.
Mm,
But I just started writing about the experience, and it really helped draw out a lot more. And then I just basically was cold all night long in a way that I hadn't been. So it was cool also because we went from extremes, right? Like that day, we had that sort of march across the desert in the like
yeah.
super hot, no water, like super dehydrated. That's probably the most dehydrated I've been in my life. We
Uh-huh.
get to the water, we're like celebrating, and then we break off. And then now I'm like, it's nighttime, I'm by myself, and it's like freezing. Not freezing. It wasn't freezing. I'm exaggerating, but
Uh-huh.
but I was able to like, took my stone knife before it got dark and like cut a bunch of that rice grass to make like at
Mm,
least a barrier between me and the ground.
yeah.
Um, so I took some of the some of the stuff that I knew I could do to sort of make it a little more comfortable.
Yeah.
Um, but I just think that it's so important that this idea of expanding comfort and sort of realizing that the body adjusts, because there's just so much of this idea of perceiving hunter gatherers as like, the Thomas Hobbes quote of like, their lives are nasty, brutish, and short because,
Mm,
they live uncomfortable lives in the constant search of food and hungry. And it's just not true. Like, or even if it is, even if, the Hadza are constantly talking about being wanting to eat food or whatever, it's like not the level of discomfort that I think modern people are like think of it as.
yeah, totally.
Anyway,
And might be uncomfortable for a modern person now if they were to jump back in time
totally.
and just be in this new place. They would probably be rather uncomfortable
Totally.
physically. But I think when you grow up in that reality, that becomes your reality, and you don't
Totally.
know anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And so I think life was as good as as it could have been. Likely, I
Mm-hmm.
imagine there were highs and there were lows, but I think
Totally.
um, just like there are now in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say people would have been able to make themselves feel physically comfortable. and
Mm-hmm.
and I that's the thing too, yeah, about this course, and that it's a little yeah, it's you're tapping into a very sort of minute window of what life would have been like, because I sort of imagine the hunter gatherer course not as a a way that a group of people would have been living, but I sort of imagine it instead as more of like a scouting party.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Totally.
More of like, we are moving through this landscape in order to gather resources, in order to scout for a new whatever the reason might be, with the idea that you're likely kind of going back
Mm-hmm.
into a village,
Mm-hmm.
or some sort of place that you call home, which would have those things like your
Totally.
blankets, like
Totally.
your more
Mm-hmm.
dialed shelters,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so and I think of it like that, because that's just how I can sort of like rationalize
Mm-hmm.
that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and the first 4 days were like the village setting, right? Where
Yeah.
we had like,
Uh-huh.
we were in wiki ups, we slaughtered a sheep, simulating a large game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like it hits both sides of that kind of thing, but then
Right.
gives you the opportunity to expand your comforts. And
Yeah.
I've never made a willow basket with a stone knife before.
Yeah.
you know
Well, it's really
um
beautiful.
it was super fun. Thanks.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, when other times would I get to do that? Really, like, I part of the part of the beauty for me of going to that school too is it's essentially, even though I run Rewild Portland, an administrator. We're in an urban context. It's really challenging for me to get out and do stuff. So, in terms of my continuing education as an educator, into bushcraft and survival skills and rewilding, being able to go and be a part of, of Boss is just like my favorite thing so far the last 2 years. So,
Yeah. Oh, good.
um, yeah, and I think for all of the different experiences. Someday I'd like to take the navigator course there as well, just because I love navigation and I have the
Mm.
basic stuff from scouts. But when I saw there was like a solo navigation as part of the thing, I was like, that's another edge of mine. That would be cool.
Yeah.
Like I said, solo stuff is really hard for me. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Uh, Speaking of solo stuff being hard, I might switch gears since that's a cool segue into just asking you a little bit more about your experience on alone in comparison to something like the hunter gatherer course. For years I heard that the whole rule of threes, right? So in survival, oftentimes we don't say the first one, which is 3 minutes without air, because that's not necessarily relevant unless you're drowning or whatever. But the rule of threes are 3 minutes without air and you die, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. And then at Boston at the 14-day, they said 3 months without companionship. And I had never heard that before anywhere
Mm.
else. And other than me just telling people all the time, community is central to being a human and blah, blah, blah. So it's really cool to have that component added on to the rule of threes. And I talked about this with Bonia, I think, too, when I interviewed her, who's also been on Alone. um that's essentially the longest somebody's been out on that show, right? Is like this 3 month
Hmm.
period.
Yeah.
And speaking of, in terms of that and the hunter gatherer, I'm curious how you would compare and contrast those kinds of experiences.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say, um, one of the things that I love about the hunter gatherer at its core is because it sort of taps me into a similar mindset as the mindset that I got when I was out on Alone.
Mm.
Um, and that to me is like a place that I really enjoy spending time in. So the hunter gatherer, even though it's different, there are a lot of similar correlations, and a lot of those correlations are related to land connection.
Mm.
And so, the connection that you get after spending an extended amount of time alone living off the land is pretty deep and pretty profound. Um, it's hard to sort of like put into words how, and if you've heard other people sort of talk about their experience on Alone, other people will say something similar, and just that it can be difficult to even put into words the relationship that you have with a particular place when you're
Mm.
spending that much time really sort of living off the land, and in a sort of in a bit of you can't travel much, so you're really getting to know one particular place a lot. And so, I'd say that's really kind of the biggest correlation between the
Mm.
two
Mm.
is that, which is the connection that you get from, your relationship to the land when you're having to live off of it. The biggest difference being you're with a bunch of other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always said, like, man, I would just love to do this with more people. I think that 3 month, timeline, that 90-day timeline, can be relative in some ways. I think probably people can go longer than that. And I think people could, not barely touch the surface of that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that has to do with like your, pushing your comfort zone a little bit. You're not going to die without companionship, really, ever.
Mm-hmm.
You might sort of like lose your mind a little bit, but you're not. It's not going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so, I think that alone experience and the experience that we get on the hunter gatherer can be really similar and also can be different. But what I love also about the hunter gatherer is like you do get to sort of choose your own adventure. And so
Mm.
there are moments, a lot of moments, particularly in the morning, where I get to sort of just go and sit for a little bit and just be in that place and tap into that place. And the pace of the field courses sometimes can be so fast that you don't have the ability to tap into a particular place.
Totally. Yeah. It was funny too, because I really like the movement of the 14-day. I really like hiking and just and moving. And it was that first the base camp sort of village phase of hunter gatherer was actually, I think, the hardest part for me. It also might have been because because of the elevation change. I think I had acute elevation sickness for like 4 days because I couldn't sleep
Uh-huh.
and I had headaches and stuff. Because we were Portland is at 0, and where we
Yeah.
were in Boulder Mountain was probably like 8,000 maybe, or
Yeah, I think we were probably hovering right around like 75.
yeah.
Yeah, like 70, right around there.
So yeah, it's funny too, and just in thinking of how my body, bodies adapt. Like by the end of the 2 weeks, I felt like I was ready to just keep going. I
Yeah.
was just feeling like I was just hitting my stride, and everybody was like, "I can't wait to get home" or whatever. And I was like,
Yeah.
"What? We just got here. Let's stay here. I want to eat all of these acorns before I leave."
Yeah, totally. Well, I remember
Uh,
that moment. I remember there was a
mm,
particular moment shift for you that
mm.
that was really cool to see when you just kind of came down. I think, and it might have been a shift before that, but it was
Mm.
the one that was the most obvious. And you came down with your basket. You were just like, "This is so cool." Like you're like,
Yeah,
I could stay out here forever.
yeah. 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 I think, there's something about weaving too that I think that's one of the ways that I connect with a place. And so once I had
Mm,
sort of, completed one of the baskets, and it just, you're holding a thing that's like something you made with your hands from the place, that's like this
yeah,
finished object that then now you're going to use. Like, I think that made me feel sort of more rooted to the place. I mean,
yeah.
place was just gorgeous regardless, but
Yeah, totally. And
yeah.
yeah, and just the metaphor of the willow, the
Mm,
metaphor of the
mm,
weaving.
mhm, mm,
I
yeah.
I was reminded of this that when we first dropped down into Sand Creek and Willow Patch, and we
Mhm.
were just trudging through just the thickest of brush, and it was all willow in
Yeah.
there, willow and
Yeah.
rose. And I would say there's been a time in my life, a younger me would have just really sort of forced my way through those willows and
Mm.
just like
Mhm.
just like angrily like used aggression and just like pushed through. And I wouldn't, that I've done that lots of times,
Mhm.
and it's usually ended up with me injured, with little stab wounds all over
Right.
me and
Yeah.
not going very far.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then, the shift being to move around the willows,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
literally you are the weaver moving around the willows,
Mm. Mhm.
and how that sort of changes how you move through a landscape can be really, I think, profound. And
Mhm.
I appreciate the metaphor of weaving so
Mm.
much,
Mm.
and just willows in general, and their ability to teach us.
Mhm. Yeah. Awesome. Um, I have a bunch of more questions on here. One that's just kind of going back a little bit is, how did Boss and these experiences prepare you for alone? I mean, because I feel like, you mentioned that you started hunting when you were 13. And I know, when I think about alone, I think one of the core skills you have to compete on that show at all is bow hunting. Like
Mm,
I don't know how many seasons now, people either win by having, a lot of weight packed on, or by getting big game. And
yeah,
so those two things, having a lot of weight packed on, having the skill to hunt, and then being able to be alone, those are essentially like the three main things that can really make somebody competitive in that series, in
yeah.
that challenge. So how did Boss, beyond just like your childhood experiences and with hunting and stuff, sort of prepare you for that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, the one of the biggest preparers of the alone experience, through Boss would have been just time spent on the land,
Mm,
and really, sort of, I mean, call it dirt time or whatever you want to
hmm
call it, but it's really just, feeling like the I felt really dialed in my, um, in sort of like my foundation,
hmm
that I can just take those skills and transpose them in any environment, anywhere in the world. Um, and so, and that doesn't happen, I guess, necessarily overnight. That's like,
Totally.
at this point, 2008, I don't know, 2023, it's a lot of years that I've been, working as at Boss, and a lot of time in the field, a lot of days spent in the field. And so just time spent on the land was really kind of the biggest teacher, for me.
Mm.
I think in Vancouver Island, it's kind of classic me in some ways, because I'm a bit of a space cadet. But I burnt up my ferro rod
Mm.
like in the first week or something like that. It just rolled into the fire.
Oh,
Got to put it away.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
I couldn't have stayed there if I didn't have a fire.
totally.
And so, to be able to transpose how to make a friction fire
Mm.
into this new
Mm.
environment and this really wet place,
hmm
was a direct skill based relationship that I had, that I learned at Boss, and perfected, I would say, at Boss, and was able to do that in, some would say, well, the rainforest,
Yeah,
essentially.
right. Right.
Um, and just, yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest thing, is
Mm.
just time.
hmm Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, the Pharaoh rod thing is funny. And, it's I'm always blown away when there's like a contestant on there. I don't think it's happened in a while, but early on in the earlier seasons, like one guy just like loses his Pharaoh rod in the first like 10 minutes he's there or something. And then it's just like, well, that's it. I got to call out. Like, I can't get a fire. I remember watching that being like, what are you doing? Like, you're not even going to try to make a bow drill. It's just like
Yeah.
tapping out like that, like, wow. So
Yeah.
it's cool to see, something like that, a situation where, yeah, you lose your ferro rod and then you're like showing, well, I actually didn't need it anyway, right?
Yeah.
Um,
No, yeah. And there's been lots of people, after that, have decided, because during the show you get 10 items
mhm,
and you only get 10 items. And so you have to really pick and choose what you
mhm,
want to go with. And so some
mhm,
people have decided to, forego the ferro rod, because they feel really comfortable in making
mhm,
friction fire. And, that's really cool to see.
mhm,
Um,
totally.
but yeah.
Yeah, how do the environments compare? You've been to like Siberia, the Northwest rainforests, and then Utah. Like what, in those, what were the different challenges that maybe surprised you in those environments?
Yeah, the most uh, sort of shocking, transition was Vancouver Island for me, because
Mm,
I'd spent so much of my time in the desert, really.
mm, mhm,
And so entering this new landscape, which was very dense and claustrophobic, and moving from,
mm,
this vast,
mm,
expansive,
mm,
place, into this place that you're sort of just always, doing a bit of this. You're like walking around, just like always feeling like um, you're being rained on and
mhm,
slapped with salal, and so it was, I would say that was a pretty shocking transition, as well as I've never lived on the ocean before,
mm,
and
mm,
and um and so that was a little difficult for me too. I knew that the ocean is abundant. It's like there are very few places that are as abundant as the Pacific Northwest. I think I sort of really relied heavily on my ability to hunt in that, and I was like, well, I know that there's deer around here. I know that there's bear. I might not be like a great like ocean fisher person, but I can at least like hunt.
mhm,
And um you know, you get into that place, into that new place, and you're like, how in the hell am I going to
Mm,
get from here to over there to hunt? I mean, a deer's
mm-hmm,
not going to walk right through my camp. I mean,
mm-hmm,
that's not going to happen, but I need to be able to move at least a little bit to hunt. So, it sort of changes your game plan a little bit, and you
mm-hmm.
need to be adaptable.
Was that
And
a
so I did.
pun? The game
Yeah.
plan? Sorry, game
Yeah.
hunting. Yeah, sorry, sorry. No.
That's okay. Yeah. That's forgiven. But yeah, so and then moving into Mongolia. Mongolia felt a lot like, in some ways, Boulder. Like it's boreal forest, and
Mm-hmm.
Boulder Mountain has a lot of very similar characteristics in terms of its bioregion as I was seeing in Mongolia. And so as soon as I got into that place, I felt like I could take a breath of fresh air. Like it just felt like I felt a lot more connected to the
Mm.
place. I felt like I knew more of the plants. I knew more of the fungus. There was a river that was traveling through like my zone, and I feel a lot more comfortable fishing in
Cool.
rivers. Um, and so there were a lot of similarities in terms of the place and the flora and fauna that I saw in Mongolia as I got to experience in Boulder Mountain and Escalante area.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, it feels like Boss is a school that a lot of, I mean, I don't want to say celebrity ancestral skills practitioners because that's just like, people are becoming celebrities by going on shows but
uh,
it seems to be, Boss seems like it's been an incubator for I think, some of the highest quality ancestral skills practitioners, or just the most well known at this point. I think
yeah.
of like Cody London, who was an instructor there at one point, or Lynx Vilden, who was
Yeah.
an instructor there at one point.
Uh-huh.
Um, why? How is that?
Yeah.
My question is sort of like,
Well, I mean, I think
how does it work that way?
I think from a practical perspective, Boston's just been around for a really
Hmm.
long time.
Hmm.
Um, and so, sorry, my phone has sawdust or something in it. So it's running out of battery, but I think I'll get it going again. In any rate, Boss has been around for just a really long time. That originally started, in 1960. Well, the company of Boss, it has. I wish I knew the exact years, but it was 1968. Originally started as a BYU program, transitioned to Boss, maybe in the 70s, Boulder Outdoor Survival School, and so and it was doing something that I think was really and is really unique, um, and physically demanding, and it's not. I mean, I think the Boss at its core is a skills based school. It's not really much of a philosophy school.
Hmm.
There's philosophy that like that happens more naturally, but it's
Totally.
not built into our curriculum.
Totally.
And so it attracted people that like Lynx or Cody Lundeen or Dave Holliday or um, Matt Graham or all of these people because it was um, I think a cornerstone of the wilderness survival um, world,
Hmm.
and in some ways was kind of like the gold standard
Hmm.
of
Totally.
like being if you can come out and do a boss course, you can kind of do almost anything,
Hmm.
um, and just its physical toughness,
Hmm.
it's all of the other aspects, all the skills that you're learning, all of these different things. So I think it attracted students more than anything. And those students, Cody Lundeen, Lynx, Dave Holliday, Matt Graham, they were all students.
Hmm.
They weren't teachers
Hmm.
to start out with. and they became teachers, but it brought those people in because they were excited about learning and are still excited about learning, which is really cool to me. Um, and so, I think that that's probably the biggest aspect of it is that, you can't just come and be a boss instructor. You have to take a course before you do that. Um, and it just draws people in. The land draws people in. It's like we're not doing wilderness survival courses in wherever, I don't know,
Yeah.
someplace in the Midwest. It's like
Yeah.
we're doing wilderness
Yeah.
survival courses, and I would say it's one of the most beautiful landscapes in the world.
Yeah.
And so you want to stick around.
It's interesting to think about the landscape too, because I feel like there's something about that specific place that really lends itself to the experiences that are put together there that you can't really replicate. I wouldn't even know where else in the world you could replicate such a thing. I mean, like,
Yeah.
You've got the forests on Boulder Mountain that are like this diverse, interesting ecosystem, and all over the ground there is like scattered boulder jasper that's nappable stone to like make all the tools that you need out of. And then within a few hours you could just hike down into a completely different ecosystem of the canyons and desert where there's like still fresh running water and all these places. I mean, like most of the instructors at Boss have been there for long enough period of time, and their bodies are adjusted to just drink the water straight out of the ground, or a creek and stuff, where some of students like me, we're purifying the water because we don't have the microbiome to not get sick. However, I didn't have I did chug out of the Escalante when we got there without purifying the water, and it's been a few weeks and I'm good. So
yeah, well, it's good because that's probably
yeah.
that was probably the least clean
Right,
water.
exactly. That's what y'all said. I was like, okay, well, whoops.
Yeah, it's hard to sit down after you're that dehydrated and wait
Yeah,
15 minutes for your
right.
oxygen
Yeah.
on your water. You just want to get in
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
chug.
But yeah, there's something to be said about that particular location, the population density. Like we're in the desert. There's like no one around us. I mean, I think we saw one hiker when we were on that the one of the trails out there, and then
Yeah,
for the rest of the time, nobody.
yeah.
And there's bear tracks and cougar tracks and bobcat tracks, and like I can't. I mean, I can think of some places like in the Northwest, but like you were talking about there, there's like the claustrophobic sense of the trees imposing on you,
Yeah.
but also the fire danger. Now you're not allowed to have fires during certain times of the year, which you still are in the desert in places. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's just so many restrictions in other places as well. So there's just like all these different elements that coalesce in that spot, and then to have the school be located sort of like right in the middle of all of this, I think that has to play a role in how effective the programs are.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've said it many times before, but it's like we are the instructors are facilitating experience, but the land is what's teaching
Mm,
us.
mm,
And it's true. We are just really blessed to be able to be in that place. And I think um yeah, all of the things that you said, all of the different bioregions that you have, Boulder Mountain at 11,000 feet, all of this, the water, the springs that feed down, in less than 20 miles or so, you're down at 6,000 feet from 11,000 feet. And so it creates these really amazing canyon systems. Um, the water just wearing away the earth year after year. And so it just has everything that you could possibly want in terms of its abundance. Yeah.
Yeah, even when when I think when people said the desert when I first heard of Utah and Boss, I was like envisioning, sort of like a tumbleweed going by with a saguaro in the background, and just sand everywhere. And then you get there and you're like, oh, this is actually there's water and there's like different trees and
Yeah.
like the canyon lands. It's interesting too because there's like the microclimates down inside the canyons that have like the oaks and acorns and
Mm-hmm.
the water stuff, and then at the top of the canyons you have like the sage and the pinyon pines and
Mm-hmm.
rabbits and whatever, and it just creates these like fascinating ecological layers that you can just kind of like bounce up and down and go through. And yeah, I just
I know. I feel it. It's
something
in you.
else.
Yeah, it's like it's I see it in you now. So
Yeah, and I just think about how would, again, like sort of, I live here, this is my home in the Northwest, and like how would I replicate something like this? And finding it makes me think of just like most animals like to live on these ecotones, which are the space between the specific systems, right? Because that's where the most biodiversity sort of lives, is on the edges of two different places. And so kind of
yeah.
like, how would you be able to find another location to mirror those activities? And I mean, if you're talking about, again, like where would hunter gatherers like to dwell for different seasons, where they're going to dwell on the edge of those two different places where they can get the maximization of those resources,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just find yourself in the middle of it all.
Mm-hmm. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's my own plan here, is to try to figure out where would there's
I
be
know. Well, if
anyway.
you once you figure it out, let me know because
Yeah, I
I'm
will. um One other thing, this is sort of a personal question from my own, experience that I have for you as a hunter. I'm still sort of up and coming, trying to figure out how to, do more hunting as I'm integrating into this. It's always been the skill that I've sort of lacked. It's been challenging financially to do hunting stuff while living in the city. You have to get the right gear, the permits, yeah, gas to travel out of it, yada yada yada.
mm,
So it
time.
hasn't been on my list of priorities until recently, and I'm kind of getting more into it. But I have this thing that happens, that I've noticed, and um, I guess the best I don't know if I told you the story about the rabbits in my backyard, but I did. I told this story to a few people out there, but if not, I'll just kind of use that as like this anecdote.
Yeah.
Um, so a couple winters ago, I had a garden and stuff, but I hadn't eaten it in a while. It snowed. I was looking out the window, and I noticed that the chard had been like nibbled all the way down to the base. And I went out in the backyard. I was like, what could have done this? And there's like rabbit scat all over the place. But I'm thinking, oh, this no, rabbits don't live around here in this part of the city. I've never seen them. Would squirrels do this? It's like right at the perfect rabbit height. It looks like rabbits nibbled it, whatever. I put images of all the things, all the sign on the internet. I'm like, friends, what is this? And everyone's like, it's a rabbit. I'm like, okay, fine. But how did it get? So I look up like brush rabbit on the internet. They're active at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or at dusk or whatever. I run over and I look at the window because it's dusk, and there's just this giant fat rabbit like in my backyard, like eating, like my chard. Uh,
Uh-huh.
so I'm like, okay, whatever. I should, this is an opportunity for me to like maybe practice the throwing stick and like kill a
Yeah.
rabbit with a throwing stick. So I get a throwing stick. I go in my backyard, and I sealed off. I figure out where it's coming in. There's like 4 different entrances. So I get stones and I place them next to all the exits. And then I wait until I see it in the backyard again. Then I go back out there and I slowly walk around the yard and I close off all the exits so the rabbit can't get away. And I have this throwing stick. And the first couple of throws, I'm just like, I'm throwing it. And there's like something in my body that's like I feel like I'm missing on purpose. Like there's like
Mhm.
I'm not connecting with the rabbit, and I feel like it actually doesn't have a lot to do with skill. I mean, there's definitely part of it of just like understanding how to throw things or like shoot a bow and arrow. Like aim is super important and all that. But I feel like there's like this underlying thing that like I'm scared to kill an animal or something.
Yeah.
And I'm
Uh-huh.
wondering like if you've ever experienced that. If not, whatever. But like, as a youth, when you were first starting to hunt, like, did you ever have hesitation with that particular thing? And is there a way to get over that or overcome that?
Mm. Well, I'll tell you just kind of a quick story of my first deer kill. Um, I started hunting when I was 13. I saw my father hunt and kill animals and my uncle's grandfather. And I actually didn't end up getting my first deer until I was 16. And I saw kind of the way that they were going about the process of hunting, and it just didn't really resonate with me. It was
Hmm.
more of just not, it's just about there wasn't much connection between them and the animal. It was just about killing, putting meat on the table, all of those sort of things, which is a way to go about the process of doing it. But
Totally.
at that point, I was kind of really interested in just um, sort of the how a you know without sound, I don't know how I want to put this, but I was just interested in how a Native American
Hmm.
would have hunted an animal. Being a sort of at 16 years old, I was reading these books, and I read about the vision
Mm-hmm.
fast and the vision quest
Mm-hmm.
and all of these things. And so I was like, well, I want to try to do it that way. I want to see what that's like. And so I ended up basically taking a bus. So we had to where our cabin is in Big Rapids. It's across the state in sort of northwest Michigan. I ended up taking a bus across the state and being in the cabin alone for 3 days. And this was not our hunting cabin was not like your picturesque hunting cabin. I mean, it was a old dilapidated barn. I mean, there were mice. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
mice would be running over me every single night. I mean, it was like, it just reeked. It was unlived in, unkempt. It wasn't a nice place to
Mm-hmm.
be. And so, but I ended up just doing a 3 day fast, and then going out and I set up my tree stand, went out, and then and sat in the tree. And the very first morning, I had a deer, kind of come into my zone, and I ended up, taking the shot. And that moment of release, the moment of watching an animal sort of come into like your shooting zone, it's this moment of your heart's, beating, you're nervous, but you're also so quiet, and it's such a tender moment as well. And I ended up basically taking the shot, and I ended up shooting a little bit high. So I dropped the deer right in front of me because I hit it in the spine, but it wasn't dead. So I had my knife, and so I went out, came down from my tree stand, and I just saw this deer, and it was clearly it was scared,
Mm-hmm.
and I could see it in its eyes. And I just laid my hands
Mm-hmm.
down on this deer, and ended up, taking this deer's life with my
Mm-hmm.
knife.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time in my life that I realized the importance of hunting, to take
Mm.
another animal's life and to connect with that animal, and watch that animal, I
Mm.
would say, their spirit like
Mm.
leaving their body, their life force leaving their body as it took its sort of last gasping
Mm.
breath. Um,
Dude,
it
that's so
was
intense.
it was the
Oh
most
my God.
powerful,
Yeah.
and still probably the
Yeah.
most powerful like
Totally.
hunting experience in my
Mm.
life. It
Mm.
changed the way I viewed hunting forever. So, you know, yeah, it's not, I would say, if I were to offer a bit of advice about getting over it, it never gets easy.
Mm.
Taking an animal's life is not
Mm.
something that should ever be taken lightly, and it's never easy to do
Mm.
it. But to do it with intention and care and awareness, I would say, is as good as a gift as you possibly can
Mm.
offer to that animal before you know, take their life,
Yeah.
before they're offering themselves to us.
Yeah.
So, just going out and tossing sticks at rabbits is one thing, but
Yeah.
if you're wanting to get really serious into hunting, I would say, take time, really consider what it is that you're doing, and try to connect with the animal in a
Yeah.
way that um, is in exchange.
Yeah. That's essentially where I'm at. I didn't end up killing those rabbits with the sticks. The neighbors came outside. We have a shared driveway, and they saw me in the backyard, and they saw the rabbit, and they brought their like 4-year-old child out, and they were like, "Hi, did you get a pet rabbit? Can we show our little child?" Or whatever. I'm like, I just can't. And
Oh
I'm
God.
like hiding the stick behind my back, and I was just like, like I have a really hard time lying about stuff, and I was just like, actually, I'm out here hunting it. And they were just like,
Uh-huh.
oh, and like, slunk back quietly into their house. And,
Yeah, totally. I
you
know.
know,
It's so funny being doing what we do on a regular basis. People just think that we're the oddest of
Totally.
folks, you know, but
Yeah.
it's, you know, at this point, I don't even try to hide it anymore. I'm
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean,
like,
that's same. I mean, I was just like, I'm just going to tell them what I'm doing, you know?
yeah.
But yeah, there was this moment where I missed maybe two or three times. They came outside. Um, and then the rabbit, like, it had been running away from me, in circles, trying to figure out what exit it could get out of. And when it finally kind of realized, like, there's no exit from this yard, like something switched in it. Its whole physiologically, I could tell there was something different. And it was like scared for its life. Whereas before it was like, I'm going to run from this. I'm kind of scared. But then it was,
Yeah.
there was this switch. And that's when I was kind of like, oh no,
I
like,
know. Yeah.
maybe I can't do this. And then the rabbit like jumped through the chain link fence in the driveway,
Hmm.
like through one of the tiny smaller holes, and it was like it got stuck in the fence, and its like little legs were like kicking, like this. And I was like, oh no, it's stuck. Well, now I got to mercy kill it, which I've done plenty of times to mice and things. But so I run over to the fence, and it pops out and like runs down the driveway, and I was like, okay, whatever, maybe it's not gonna eat my vegetables anymore.
Uh-huh.
But then the next day I'm in the front yard, and I move a pile of debris that I had left there a couple of weeks ago, and there was like a rabbit nest underneath it, and there were four baby rabbits. And
Oh
I was
yeah.
like, oh no. And there was a coyote that lives in our neighborhood that has only three legs. And I was like, I know that the coyote is eating these rabbits. Like, maybe I should just leave these urban rabbits for the coyotes. Like,
Uh-huh.
they got to eat too. So we
I
decided
know.
to turn our backyard into sort of a rabbit sanctuary. So now every day I
Yeah.
look at
Totally.
the last couple
Well,
of years, it's been a little rabbit sanctuary. However, the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to trap the squirrels that are here. So it is legal to
uh-huh.
do that here in this area. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, anyway. So, but I now
Well,
the challenge is, how do I do that without getting the rabbits and all these other things that are,
I
sort of
know.
in that space. So I've been trying to sort of get that dialed in. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, you're taking a life one way or another, whether you're buying
Totally.
food, you know,
Yeah.
meat at the grocery store
Yeah.
wrapped in plastic, or whether
Yeah.
you're, you know, trapping the squirrels in your
Yeah.
front yard or the rabbits
Yeah.
that are eating your chard. It's like one way or another, you're a part of the process, and if you
Yeah.
could get right up to it, that's,
Hmm.
you know, as good as it can be,
Totally.
because we gotta
Right.
eat.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I also, one last thing, just just one last little story. I made a bow with you at the hunter
Yeah.
gatherer. Unfortunately, I tried to take it on the plane with me on the way
Uh,
back, kind of
yeah.
like, flipping a coin whether that was going to work. I took the string off, so it was like just a stick, no arrows or anything.
Uh-huh.
But they just kind of eyeballed it for a while, and they were like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Well, I can't say it's a stick." I'm like, "It's a
uh,
bow," and they were like, "You can't take bows on the plane. Like, you can check it if you want." But that I would have had to go like all the way upstairs and then pay for shipping and all this other stuff. And so I was just like, you know what,
yeah.
I'm just gonna let it go, and I'm just gonna take the knowledge, and I'm just gonna start
Mhm.
working on another one right away before I forget it all. So I'm actually
Yeah.
working on a vine maple bow right now.
Oh yeah. Let's see.
Still pretty thick here,
Oh yeah.
but
Uh-huh.
anyway, yeah. So I'm
That's
gonna
great.
keep going on that, and
Yeah.
yeah, try my hand
Awesome.
at shooting maybe some rodents with that the next time I get a chance.
Yeah. Well, then you can know what you're catching.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's like it's so far looking pretty good. Is it green?
It is green. Yeah.
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 Okay.
So hopefully it
Well.
won't warp too much as it dries, but if it does, I
Yeah.
can figure out a way to steam bend it. Maybe I'll try the old
Uh-huh.
bull kelp steam
There
bender
you go.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Yeah. Well, don't get too attached. You know, at the end of the day, it is
Yeah.
actually just a stick.
Totally. Yeah. No, I was kind of working on it. Rewild Portland does, like, we were doing a demonstration at the museum the other day, and somebody's working on a spoon, somebody's a basket, and I was just kind of roughing out the bow, and people were like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "Well, I hope it's a bow at some point, but right now it's a stick. I don't know what's
Yeah.
going to happen
Totally.
to it." So,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Yeah. Well,
um,
there's a good lots of good lessons in there.
last question. During the hunter gatherer course, there was mention of maybe a longer version, like a 28-day
Mm,
hunter gatherer course, and maybe
yeah.
including the potential for people doing bigger game hunting, like taking out deer or something like that.
Uh-huh.
What do you see as a boss instructor as the future of the hunter gatherer course?
Yeah, I mean, me and Jesse and I have been talking about doing a hunter-gatherer course or a longer hunter-gatherer course for a long time, and both of our lives at this point are pretty full.
Hmm.
Jesse's got three little babies, I got one little baby, and so figuring out the best way to to work that in is, I would say, the biggest logistical detail to dial in. But we just did the 30, let's see, it would have been the 34th hunter gatherer, right? So we're thinking, in the future, 40 seems like a good number.
Mm.
We would do a 40-day hunter gatherer,
For the
and
40.
yeah, for the 40.
That's
And
awesome.
so that would be, um, a course which would, we were talking a lot about it, and have been
Mm.
sort of dialing in some of the details.
Mm.
But we would essentially have we'd have a village set up, or
Hmm.
we would build a village, for the first couple of, maybe like first, 4 or 5 days, and then head out on expeditions similar to what we did, but then return back to the
Mm.
village. And during our village time, we would slowly start to take away, any sort of like modern gear. So we would, as opposed to, even the clothes that are on our back, we would tan hides and make
Mm.
clothes.
Mm.
Doing a larger, game hunt, I think we're wondering just what is the best way to go about doing that. I mean, we haven't quite figured that out, but the best sort of plan that we have right now is to have students in small groups, either one or maybe two people, come out with us, Jesse or I. So that way we can, because going from zero hunting experience to try to hunt a an elk or a deer with a bow that you
Right.
made,
Yeah, yeah.
is a very steep curve.
Mm, totally.
And so we would have our bows that we made at the village, um, and then heading out, showing essentially how to go about the process of scouting a good hunting area, what to look for in terms of tracks and sign, knowing that there's animals that are moving through that area, and then setting up basically a hunting
Hmm.
zone, and then trying to actively hunt a larger animal with, maybe we take one or two people out each day, once in the morning, once at night, and just see what we can see. And I think if we're doing that for 4 or 5 days in a row, I think our chances are probably pretty high of getting something. So then
Yeah.
we would now have, food that we can then travel,
Mm.
for a longer period of time. And the other aspect of this course, because it would be so long, is we could have maybe guest instructors
Mm.
passing through the village, people like, um,
Hmm.
people who are experts at one particular thing.
Hmm.
We have some really amazing foot nappers, that are part of
Hmm.
the Boston group, core instructor group, that would maybe come through, or maybe a really amazing pottery or basketry instructor. Um, and um, and then, even doing, like a 3 or 4 day sort of, we were talking about even doing a 3 or 4 day scout mission,
Mm.
where we would head down into maybe Boulder town, and raid the dump, and go on a little like raiding
Yeah.
mission and try to get some, you know some some
Mm.
scrap steel,
Mm.
and come back up and forge
Mm.
knives.
Mm.
um Little things like that, where we could have like a
Mhm.
little 3 or 4 day scout camp,
Mm. Mm.
we're learning all the those aspects, those skill aspects.
Mm.
And then the idea being that, when we left the course, we had everything that we were carrying, we had made,
Mm.
and we were fully sort of sustaining ourselves off the land in every way possible.
Mm.
And I think that that would be a really fun and good experience, and well, I think would be a blast.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it.
Uh-huh.
It's a beautiful vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
love
yeah,
that.
we'll see. It could happen. You know, I think that couple years out, maybe 3 or 4 years out,
Hmm.
um, I guess that would be like 6 years out. But
Mm-hmm.
who knows? We might do it earlier. But it seems
Yeah.
like I like that number. 40 seems like a
Hmm.
good number for that.
Yeah. It seems like a cool sort of like anniversary type of a
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah.
and people who have done the hunter gatherer would be
Hmm.
the folks who would be able to come out and do that
Hmm.
course. And yeah, we'll see.
Awesome.
We'll see
Cool.
how it goes.
Any last thoughts or anything you want to share?
No, man, I just
Cool.
really, it was really great to talk to you again, Peter. It's
Awesome.
really
You
good to
too.
see your face, and
Yeah, you too.
um, yeah, just chat with you and reminisce about our time in the desert. And yeah, I hope we'll be able to get you out and have
Awesome.
you become
Me
a
too.
part of the group soon.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rewilding Podcast. Check the show notes to connect with my guest and for a list of resources that we mentioned in our conversation. If this episode inspired you, made you think more deeply, or gave you some new tools to use, make sure to subscribe and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. And of course, if you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. Thanks for listening.